Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today we have with us Mr. Brad Salzberg. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, thank you, Payman.
Brad, first of all, I'm actually really excited about this show. I've been meaning to get you on this episode. I've been meaning to get you on for a while. I'm very interested in what you're doing. Um, for the benefit of the audience, could you tell us a little about yourself?
Well, I'm the founder of Cultural Action Party of Canada, and we began as a registered political party in British Columbia and Ontario. We ran three candidates in the provincial election in 2019 in Ontario. Um, but since that time, it sort of morphed into more of a media and social media and alternative media entity. And we actually found a lot of success in that capacity, as opposed to the political element, which, as you may appreciate, is a difficult road to take. So the social media element, blogging, and our Cultural Action Party internet website, and so on and so forth, has really thrived. And I'm surprised at the level of success. So that's where we stand now. And I've been writing on political issues relating to Canada and the political environment for many years. But in this current incarnation, it's been about 7 years now.
So before getting onto the party itself, you called it the social media presence. I'm only aware of your Substack articles. Is that the bulk of your presence, or is there where is most of your energy directed at?
The those articles are simply replicated on our main website, which is really just a blog. It's a blog. There isn't a multiple pages, and there's reasons for this. But so that's the URL is www.capforcanada.com. So CAPFOR Canada.com. So that's sort of the anchor of it, and from there the articles are disseminated throughout social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and some of the other players to a lesser degree. And we've had a lot of success. Our clicks are 100,000 a month, all told, maybe.
And please forgive my goldfish memory, but you said you guys you used to operate out of Ontario. Are you still in Ontario?
No, we're based in Vancouver, but we didn't operate out of Ontario. I had a partner who was based in Ontario, and together we worked and ran three candidates, and we got a few votes, which is nice. But we're not that well known an entity, and I think there's also reasons for that too. That our degree of political incorrectness, mainstream media, our impact is big, but mainstream media won't touch us. Either in it, they did at one point, either in a, it won't touch us in a positive or negative capacity. And certainly there would be no positive reception from mainstream media.
I'm going to ask you. It's a pretty broad question, but I'll give you as much time as you need to answer it. What is the vision of your cultural action party?
The vision is for political solidarity among a segment of society, primarily. I mean, anyone could be part of it if they share similar beliefs. But I've always advocated for, as an idea, establishing a nonprofit organization that would support um, Canadians of European heritage, Anglophone Canadians, Anglo-European Canadians, and in a in a manner of political solidarity akin to what we see from our various communities, ethnic and religious communities, in within our pluralist society. This is what I think is critical. In fact, as the landscape of Canada continues to change and morph, transition toward Justin Trudeau's and Jagmeet Singh's vision of Canada, and some of the keywords being, no core identity, um, postmodern society. To me, these are euphemisms for transitioning Canada to a socialist state. And I think that the ramifications for particular communities are dire. Like they're not good at all. And this is an element that's um, kept out of the mainstream media narrative that over time, due to immigration quotas and immigration intake, uh, partially that, and myriad other factors, that Trudeau and Singh, at least at this point, and via their pact, their supply and confidence agreement, are actually working to transition Canada to a postmodern identity. And I happen to believe, and many of the people who support us and comment and write what have you feedback, agree that the Anglophone European communities of Canada are potentially in trouble. I mean, I could elaborate on it if you like, but I'd put it that way because what's being held back by media is the fact that basically white Canadians are transitioning to a minority status, and and this and they will under the current immigration policies. My personal concern is that not only will this occur, but that these communities will become or are already, the punching bag of woke liberal society. And this is manifested in many different ways. But I think that's about a decent summary for the moment.
I want to talk about this later, but we can skip ahead right now. I have a friend of mine, you might know him, Jayant Bandari. He leads the Capitalism and Morality conferences here in Vancouver. He's a finance guy and he looks at numbers, and he looked at the numbers of birth, and he looked at the number of white births in Canada, and I guess
Yeah.
like non-white as an immigrant, first generation. And he predicted that there's a civil war coming. He goes, just by looking at the numbers. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts, it's an interesting point. I mean, Civil War may be a little bit dramatic or what have you. However, and I've written about this recently in particular, that is the Trudeau government desirous of a form of so-called civil war? Are they intentionally cultivating civil dis, chaos? And are they intentionally doing it? And part of my thinking is based on the fact that at least a year of conservative polling, I mean of federal political polling, has the Conservative Party out in front by a long shot. And when that continues for, let's say, 1 year, which I think is pretty accurate, the Liberal NDP Socialist Coalition, as I would refer to them, are getting very nervous. And therefore, what do you do? If it's inevitable, apart from rigging an election and cheating, which is not outside the realm of possibility, as we witnessed in this alleged Chinese government interference into the past 2 or 3 elections, um, then the, what is their recourse to remain part of government? If they cultivate enough social discord, then the so-called, it's your term, civil war may break out, and that justifies a government crackdown in the form of what is known as martial law, which provides the government with an opportunity to basically seize control, even so far as to delay or possibly cancel an election. So this what you're saying is a legitimate point. It I mean it it hasn't happened. We can't say that it's happened, but on a theoretical basis, yes, I believe it is possible.
I think Giant, what he was talking about, I should have explained this better. I asked him specifically, I'm like, do you mean like a hot civil war, like shootout? And he said, no, what's happening is that we have all these ghettos and people come in and it's the curse of multiculturalism. So you got these ghettos and they're all just going to be fighting with each other. We've seen it with the, I can't pronounce it, Eritreans. Like, do you think this is going to continue and escalate and get worse and worse?
I think as long as a federal liberal government is in place and that Justin Trudeau is prime minister, yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing about it, that, and in my writing, that's kind of maintained that the Justin Trudeau as a 22nd Prime Minister of Canada is unlike all previous national leaders. This is something that CBC or Globe and Mail and they never allude to this kind of thing. And what makes this government different is that their goal, in my opinion, is not one of management, economic management, fiscal health, or any of that. Their goal is a kind of subtle or not so subtle form of social revolution. And that is the differential. The mainstream media have never mentioned anything of this nature. Um, and that's what I see. So that what we have here is kind of like the rebirth of a nation, or the reinvention, a born again Canada, if you want to use that term. And actually, it's delineated in a very clear way. From 1867 to 2015, 150 years, you know, we had a certain identity as a country, and now, and on October 29th, 2015, that was transformed the day Justin Trudeau became prime minister, and instantly we were on a path toward a neo Canada. And this is what I believe Trudeau has been working on like a madman, with obsessively, um, and in a robotic fashion. And until he is removed from office, if he is, this will continue.
Do you think Justin Trudeau sort of we were sold a bill of goods and he's kind of unilaterally changing the country, or do you think this is a direction we're going in with urbanization and indoctrination through the schools, where it's kind of sadly we're drifting in this direction?
Unilateral is a good word, to describe this situation. And I say that because, briefly, to talk about Pierre Trudeau, he was cut from the same cloth. He was the same. Multiculturalism was unilaterally implemented by Pierre Trudeau's Liberal government. There was no mandate from the people. There was no referendum or anything like that, and that was revolutionary in its time. Um, what Justin has done is in a similar capacity. However, and as it's interesting because I just wrote an article on his half brother Kyle Kemper, I believe it, or Kemper. um, who talked about this, you know, that Justin is he called it metaphorically, Justin is just the captain of the hockey team. He's not the manager. And like as a metaphor, I think it's a good point, right? So yes and no, Justin is the figurehead, but to say that the on an ideological basis that this all comes from the brain of Justin Trudeau, I would say is wrong. It's wrong. It's much more global and international in its scope. So yes, he is the coach of a woke globalist political hockey team. The the ownership and management reach beyond him.
Uh, Kind of a related question. If you could turn back Canada to like the one period where you think it was the most free, I'm not talking about the most wealthy, but
Okay.
like when would you wind the clock back? Would you just 2015, 2001, the 1960s?
1967, Montreal Expo, 1967. Because this is the year previous to when Pierre Trudeau took over as prime minister. And also that those of us old enough to remember that time period um, can recall the pride and country that did exist, sort of encapsulated in that song. 1, 2, 3 Canadians, we love thee. That was, I believe, the theme song of Montreal Expo 67. And at that time, we're also talking about a different generation and the so called hippie generation and the summer of love time. And so there's other cultural elements involved. But I would say, in looking back, that this was the peak of Canada as a nation, of pride. Not perfect, Aboriginal persecution did exist, and historically all of that. Not perfect at all. From there, Pierre Trudeau began to transition Canada. He's the father of Canadian self-flagellation, in my opinion. Justin Trudeau, decades later, put the whole thing on steroids to the point that we became a transforming Canada into the sort of masochistic society that hates itself. And this was done for a very specific reason, to sow the seeds for this kind of social revolution, which I actually coined the term woke revolution. Um, and we saw this in the early days of Justin Trudeau's reign over Canada and the 2016-2017 period, in which he ran around Canada apologizing to every ethnic community, religious community, special interest, fringe, LGBT that he could, right? And he went through this series of we apologize to the Sikhs, we apologize to, the homosexuals, we apologize to everyone, thus setting up a the thus sowing the seeds for this full transition into a self-hating society. And this sowed the seeds for his revolutionary conquest, because what if the country has to minimize pride in country, which is what he did, as well as dividing our ethno-religious communities into silos, angry and bitter silos, right? This whole thing, in my opinion, is steeped in Marxist ideology. The roots of all this can be found in socialist and Marxist political philosophy. And this is Pierre Trudeau, and this is Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, I hate that word, Marxist. Makes me really angry when I hear it. Uh,
It's
did
all
you
over
hear
our
about?
sorry
Go ahead.
to interrupt, but just saying that is so infused into our education and academic systems. It's downright sick.
Yeah, I agree. I'm myself. I'm a product of the universities, public universities. It's pretty bad on campus.
Yeah. I mean, and this is to expand on that. I mean, this is the way that Marxism and communism um, proliferates, right? It works its way into all the major institutions within a society. In terms of switching the topic slightly now, but in terms of academia, this happened with, I'll blame it on Pierre Trudeau. I blame most things on the Trudeau family, who I loathe in a serious way. But it was Pierre Trudeau who opened the door to China to come into our country and penetrate our institutions, be it economic or, and particularly academic. And this is part of the seeds of our academic transition to a Marxist infused educational dynamic. And the other part, of course, is just simply North American Marxist roots of that existed. And what happened, again, is my observation, is that they took the Marxist imperative and applied it to race and sexuality, right? I mean, it already was somewhat race oriented in its infancy and in the old days, But these people, they added sexuality to it, so they created another layer of a persecuted class among homosexuals and transgender, therefore putting the entire thing on steroids, and that's why I refer to this whole thing as neo-socialism or neo-communism, because the LGBT component didn't exist, I don't believe, in its original form of socialist doctrine.
Tie it all up in a nice neat bow for us. Like this whole concept of creating rights out of nothing, like trans rights, human rights, climate
Mm,
rights. Now,
yeah,
how does that tie back to the 1982 charter and judicial activism to the courts?
very much so. That's a good question, right? Because this is the thing about this character Pierre Trudeau, right? Like, what he did was insidious, right? Because not only did he introduce multiculturalism, really force it, although the act was passed technically by Brian Mulroney's conservative government, but the ideology was forced upon Canada by Pierre Trudeau. In tandem with that, he instituted the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This had a profound effect on Canadian society, one in which mainstream media has never touched on. It's a disgrace. But anyway, what happened is that the Charter enabled a transition from um, on two levels primarily. One was in terms of empowerment of so-called fringe minority LGBT communities. The other was a transition of power away from Parliament, away from the House of Commons, and into the hands of Pierre Trudeau's leftist lawyer legal buddies. And these fundamental transitions have transformed Canadian society. This is the reason why, for example, a community of less than 1% of society, now referring to the transgender community, uh, could end up being our news could end up being saturated by something in which 99% of Canadians do not indulge in, right? We have to add to that the fact that 90% of LGBT advocates aren't actually transgender. They're woke warriors, bitter and resentful and angry woke warriors who, leverage transgenderism to attempt to fulfill their agendas. But if you want, if we go back to, I think, fundamentally why this kind of empowerment of the fringe and empowerment of the legal industry in Canada took off, I attribute it to Pierre Trudeau and his Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1982.
What about the financial element? 1974, again, Trudeau, number one culprit. He basically privatized the Central Bank of Canada, and then we started taking on debt. We have to pay the interest on the debt now. Do you think that the reason that these activists are angry and are easily manipulated by the left is that they're being incrementally impoverished?
That sorry, that the leftists are being like the woke.
Well, the government is making us more and more poor. As we get more poor, we get more angry, and as we get more angry, the left just comes along and is like, "Hey, Brad Salzberg's the problem. Let's go after him. Let's get trans rights."
I don't know if I see it so much that way actually, but what I will say is there's a term, utilized in Canadian academia and USA and elsewhere called cultural Marxism. And cultural Marxism is a phenomenon that I think has validity and that I think is integral to this transition, to the loss of wealth in Canada. Because what cultural Marxism, an academic derived theory, purports is that basically there's no difference between Canada and Somalia, or there shouldn't be. That financial equitability should be uniform among nations. This is something, for example, that the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab, former CEO, chairman, advocate. And this is so when we look at now, not to say that previous governments, including a succession of conservative governments, did not give away big money, billions, to so-called developing nations, right? But when Justin came in 2015, he put it through the roof. He upped it to crazy, made it. It's crazy. We're giving away billions and billions and billions of taxpayer dollars every year to 50 countries at least and more, right? Most of them found in the Middle East, theocratic Muslim nations, theocratic African nations, and also India. Even India, what are we giving foreign aid to India for, right? And a little bit to China, and a little bit to Iran, even. But the bulk of it would go to like Syria. Well, Trudeau gives them 130 million a year. Afghanistan gets over 100 million a year. Add it all up, it's in the billions, right? So what we have here is a manifestation, in part, of cultural Marxism. So Trudeau, this is a guess. In his mind, Canada's too rich. We're living the high life. I'm going to mess with that, ship off the money to other countries in an attempt to create an equilibrium among nations of the world in a fulfillment, in my opinion, of World Economic Forum's mandate, which I believe has a giant influence on Liberal government policy under Justin Trudeau.
I want to talk about this issue of giving amnesty to illegals and bringing Palestinian quote unquote refugees over.
Mm-hmm.
The liberals are falling in the polls.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they doing that now? Why are they not at least saying, guys, there's an election on the horizon. Let's tone down the rhetoric around unfettered immigration?
I think for the same reasons that they've always done it, and maybe with a bit more, gusto now. It's a good question. I mean, one theory that I believe in is due to the cyclical nature of Canadian federal politics, meaning the going back and forth, vacillation, between conservative and liberal, the liberal strategists, Gerald Butts and Katie Telford, and these people behind the scenes, believe that in 10 years the liberals will be back, right? Once, if a conservative government is elected, the job of media is to beat the crap out of them every day while they're in power. Eventually, after, let's say, 10 years, the public tire of them, and some scandals happen, whatever it is, we don't know, right? The liberals will theoretically be back to continue with the exact same agenda. So for now, they're pumping the country filled with illegals, or considering making, I believe it is 500,000. The term they have for it is not illegal that they use, but they are illegal, um, undocumented they call them, and they'll make them legitimate Canadians. So for one thing, they'll I don't believe you can't vote on day one, I don't think, of being a landed immigrant status, but it does lead toward liberal votes as they desperately dig for every vote they can scrape up against the conservatives if and when a future election does come. So I think there's a few different reasons there. The other, I would say, a little bit more conspiratorial, is that they want to anger general public and general society, provoking them into an incident such as manifest in the truckers' convoy, but on a larger scale. And I think, not to deviate too much here, but I do believe the truckers' convoy, part of it was a dry run for an implementation of martial law, or something of that variety, and that the frozen bank account situation was it was near fascist in its implementation, right? We're going to freeze your money. Trudeau and the Liberals want to scare the heck out of Canadians so that they won't rebel. So, and if they do rebel, this is what you're going to get. But then again, maybe they want the rebellion. I don't know. Maybe they want it, like I was saying, so they can seize control of the country, defer a federal election, and continue to implement their agenda. Because that's, in my opinion, what it's all about. It's not about fiscal management. It's about neo-socialist revolution, and Jagmeet Singh is right there with them. He's Trudeau's partner through something called the Supply and Confidence Agreement, and at the very least, they're going to drag this out until the full term expires in October of 2025, and continue their war on Canadian society till the absolute final moment.
So I'm gonna recapture what you said. The liberals, they always come in, they destroy the country, and then we vote in the conservatives when they're pretty much done fixing the damage. The liberals, we vote them back in, and they just cause even more damage. What's Canada going to look like in 25 years if we just keep going down this road?
I think the question is whether the Liberal and NDP, but whether this agenda will succeed, right? So this is something that remains unknown, really, because the future hasn't arrived yet. Um, I'm not optimistic. I'm not optimistic. I think that it's more likely. I mean, unless Oliver comes in and radically changes things, uh, in the long run, in 25 years, he'll be in a very difficult situation, right? Trudeau has the immigration numbers at 500,000 a year. Oliver comes in theoretically, and what's he going to do? Cut it to 400? Cut it to 100? If he does, he'll just be slammed as a racist by mainstream media. So it's very tough. And the reason why, in my opinion, it's so tough, and that our vehicle to fight back or successfully fight back is because this is a long-term premeditated agenda. It didn't start with Justin. It started with Pierre, really. I mean, if we had to demarcate a beginning point. So this is a 50, half a century in the making. The seduction of media, the seduction of academia, the seduction of society, and in primarily by leveraging the race card, as I call it, racism, where everything the liberals don't like constitutes racism. And this is the poison, really, that's been interjected, into society. Absolute poison, that any objection to uh, immigration or refugee intake is deemed racism. This is one big area. But again, these things are preconceived. There's nothing, in my opinion, there's nothing spontaneous about any of this. Canada was earmarked for socio-political transformation. The powers that be, globalist in nature, some internal, the government of China, World Health Organization, whomever, right? They look at it. Canada, big country, small population, relatively clean, relatively crime-free, although that's changing in a big way. And they said, this is a great target. The people are moderate in their outlook. We can use this, right? So an agenda was implemented instead of protecting Canada from these nefarious globalist forces. Justin Trudeau opened the door to all of it. I mean, it's very sad. It's a real sickness, right? Because this I mean, the role as defined in the Constitution, is for the Prime Minister to place the safety, health, and welfare of the citizens of Canada at the highest level of priority, right? He's never done it. He did the complete opposite. I mean, and Canadian media um, um, softened it and refused to uh, explicitly state what has been going on. It's a giant snow job, half century, in my opinion.
Before moving on, you mentioned COVID. What is your view or your position on what happened the last 4 years?
Um, as you may be able to tell from the way I've been speaking, I do tend toward the concept of premeditation, preconceived. My opinion on COVID is that the powers that be, again, knew that the COVID plague was coming. They knew that it was on its way. They hyped it up. They put the fear factor on steroids, um, developing a cash cow for the pharmaceutical industry, for one thing. However, the element that I would indulge in that's a bit more conspiratorial is that the Chinese government utilized this for their own purposes, and the lockdowns and so on and so forth were kind of an introduction or dry run for a future authoritarian society, right? And there are very simple examples, right? When the COVID um, plague was at its peak, what kind of society were we living in? Don't walk here, stand on that dot, line up for the restaurant, put on your mask, you'll get a fine if you don't cooperate. It's like life in China, and so I I feel that COVID had a very definite socio-political purpose and economic. And again, that Justin Trudeau backed this with aplomb. He was out there, right? Everyone, get your COVID shot. Get another COVID shot. Everyone should get their booster. Everyone was like a robot of this thing, right? There was nothing along the line or in the media narrative saying, hey, a Canadian should have a choice as to what they inject into their body, right? Um, that element was, I mean, it was there to some degree, but again, the Liberals were automatons of the COVID, period of history. And I think that when we look back on it, or even now, we're going to see how pivotal this event was in our historical continuum.
I want to transition over to Europe now. I'm looking at your article, May 27th. Europe at a point of transition to right leaning political domination.
Hmm.
Give us the Brad Salzberg view of what's going on in Europe. What's going to happen?
Well, I think that the globalist woke, to use that word, agenda has resulted in the extremity of it has resulted in serious political pushback there. Now, this is not some abstract concept, right? And it'll be even less abstract, I do believe, in like 1 week when the EU elections occur. But what we see is the rise of, we'll call them right leaning or conservative parties uh, in France, in Italy, in Hungary, in Poland, I'm not sure about Spain, but in many countries, right? The interesting thing is, while Europe is on the cusp of these transitional um, governments, the Canadian media is saying next to nothing. They're not. They're not saying it, and this goes back to, is, well, it suggests what I have written in my articles, that that Justin Trudeau and the Liberals have adopted a China-like media model, and that is one in which the government controls media, turning it into as much of a bubble as they can. So it's like there's a bubble over it, that over the media narrative. So in China, what is what is antithetical to communist ideology is shut out. In Canada now, the this situation in Europe with the right leaning governments on the verge of this, and Marine Le Pen and Meloni in Italy. Interesting that a lot of them are women and are female, the leaders, is being blocked out. If it, we can imagine what our country would be like if these nation-changing events, political events, were on the pages of our newspapers and headlines and that. I mean, it'd be, wow, the world is changing due to the communist-style media that now exists in Canada. It's all blocked out. And this is because the Liberals now control the media to a great degree, and media therefore reflect what government want them to reflect. So government obviously don't want 41 million Canadians to catch wind of these changes in Europe. So the publishers, owners, and publishers, and editors, and journalists are instructed, hey, don't write about this. Like, there was one article in the Toronto Star, and they're always placing it as a disaster. This disaster is pending in Europe, which I think is completely false, and also portraying these parties as racist and Nazi and right wing and awful and terrible. which I think is also, you know, I'm not saying they're not a bunch of woke, people like Trudeau, but I don't personally believe that they are racist in that hardcore sense. No.
There's been a lot of violence against these right wing populist leaders. So recently, the Slovak prime minister, there was an attempted assassination on him. Alternative for Deutschland, one of the guys got injected with some sort of poison. He fell and got ill. Another one was beaten savagely. Left wing Vox populist got shot in the face. Do you think this is going to escalate going into the European elections?
Well, they're not very far away, right? Like I believe it's June 10th. They begin. Could be wrong about that, but yeah, I could see it escalating. I could see it escalating, and I could see something along that line coming to Canada. Um, but again, coming back to the idea that this social chaos is desired by some powerful people.
That's going to be my next question. Do you think something like this right wing populism is going to come to Canada or escalate? Because I've been watching in the Twitter spaces, anger is building up against immigration and obviously against immigrants. Do you think it's coming here?
I think when these things result, they hit Canadians in the pocketbook. This is when push comes to shove, so to speak. I do believe it's one thing for it to be um, conceptual or ideological. It's another thing when Canadians don't have money in their pockets to feed their families, and so on and so forth. Um, so that's the trigger for Canadians because, as Brian Mulrooney once stated, Canadians are by nature a moderate people. So the degree to which militancy, will manifest in the streets of Canada by way of um, our old stock Canadian communities, or the long multi generational Canadians. I don't know. It could. I don't see it as being like really. Who can say, right? I mean, if you anger Canadians enough, and particularly hit them in the pocketbook enough so that mortgages can't be paid and rent can't be paid and food can't be bought, then it is possible. I think that the era of Canada as a moderate nation is done, and I do believe that international perception of Canada since Justin took over has changed radically, and it's not seen as a nation of moderation, but rather as a woke refuge LGBT pride parade kind of society now, and anything's possible. Anything's possible. I think the days of Canada as, like I say, 1, 2, 3 Canadians. We love the Montreal Expo '67. They are dead in the water. And I would attribute it, if you had to attribute it, to a few human beings. Pierre Trudeau and Justin Trudeau would be number one and two,
Like father, like son.
if he is.
Uh, if he is. um, Going back to the culture wars, I've noticed every time that there's, be careful with my words, a rally in support of transgender rights, you see one of these big unions out in display. Like, what do you think is the connection between unions and this movement?
Well, I mean, the unions, traditionally have backed the NDP party. That's a bit of a general statement. And liberal, too. They're generally the connection between the unions in Canada and the left is very strong, and it is somewhat historical. Um, I think that as I did say, that this so-called socialist Marxist imperative um, attempts to penetrate all core elements of society. And if you look at the history of the union movement, you will see that this is really where it came from, more the socialist, um, um, its roots. So there's a tight connection there, and the unions are leftist and pro woke, to generalize. Particularly, most obviously the teachers union, teachers federation, which is big, right? And so hopefully that answers the question. Right?
I have a couple more questions. One of them is regarding the relative high rate of immigration in Canada. So somebody ran the numbers. If you look at Canadian immigration compared to U.S. per capita, we have about 8 or 9 times as much. But it doesn't feel that way. Like when I talk to people at dinner parties about immigration, they're kind of like, it's a good thing. Immigrants are people. They love their children like we do. Why is it that Canadians aren't as alarmed as Europeans or our southern neighbors?
The radicalism or militancy hasn't reached the degree that it has in Europe. And again, this is something that has been sublimated by mainstream media in Canada. There's a lot of violence, in ghetto-like violence. Get might be another term for it, but ghetto type communities in Sweden, Germany, France, and that are very militant. And so our our and even geographically, right? Because Europe, obviously one continent with smaller countries, all intertwined geographically, right? It's taken a while for it to reach Canada, and the militancy in Canada is a little more in its infancy than it is in Europe. Not a little more, I think a lot more. But we're starting to see it, and in my opinion, the Liberals brought it to Canada. They imported it. Whether this is intentional or not, maybe being a secondary point for a minute, but they imported it. I mean, this is the thing when media, when CBC and Toronto Star, when they write about the manifest the byproducts of the Gaza conflict, you know, they never suggest that responsibility lies with Trudeau and the Liberals. And this is a long-standing habit too, to blame it on the people. It's the people. It's the racist whites. It's this. It's that. It's the bigots. It's the xenophobes. You know. But in my opinion, the reason that it has reached this level is because of the Liberal government and their immigration policies and refugee policies. They've imported the conflict to Canada, and now, and this has been in the news, but I mean, not sure to what extent you've seen it, but even in Vancouver, there's been 3 attacks on Jewish synagogues in the last couple of weeks, firebomb, and in Toronto there's shots, or here in Vancouver there's shots fired at Jewish schools, and it even went so far that a bunch of people got together and walked this Jewish girl to school, in solidarity so that she would be safe. And there's another case where a Jewish mother actually pulled her young daughter, I think she's a teenager, out of high school, just because of her religious faith. And the mother said, this is crazy. I mean, here I am, I have to pull my child out of school based on her religion. And not that the Muslim community hasn't received their share of vitriol, because they have. But these are the manifestations of Trudeau and the Liberals' immigration and refugee policies. They're responsible, in my opinion.
On the issue of Israel, like, what is your position? What's your view on what's going on in the conflict in the Middle East?
Well, it's a very sad thing that, because I personally believe that the death of the innocent is always wrong. It doesn't, especially among children, particular, and that it's a very sad situation, and the fact that it is spreading throughout the world is sad and dangerous as well. Um, and I was just writing about this today, actually, in an article I haven't published yet. But talking about the Islamic nation's refusal to bring in the Gazans and the refugees. Now, that's not to say that Islamic nations haven't brought them in at all. I don't know everything about that. But in what I was reading, Egypt and, and Jordan, I think in particular, said no. The kings of both said, we're not bringing them in. Now, Egypt does happen to be uh, across the bay water from Gaza. I mean, Egypt would be an obvious place, and they said no. Now, people could get angry about this. What I'm saying is, it's just my opinion. Um, but it does seem that, and there's reason for it, that Canada and other Western nations, but just considering Canada, are responsible for, you know, the conflict halfway around the world between Muslims and and Jews and Israelis. It shouldn't be that way, in my opinion, and there are reasons for that related to the United Nations Declaration of Refugee Act. It's not the right wording, but so it's a very sad situation. And what can one say? I mean, I is there fault on both sides? Yes, there probably is. you know, and I don't even I don't. It's not my favorite topic because it's very difficult. You know, I'd love it. I'd like it to be resolved. I'd like for those Gazans not to be killed, and I certainly would prefer that what can be considered the instigating attack from Hamas didn't occur, and its savagery appears to be brutal. Um, and yeah, it's all a tragic situation.
So my last question is, it's actually it touches on foreign policy. Yesterday, Jagmeet Singh came out and he said he wants to recognize something that happened in India in 1984 with the Sikhs,
Yeah.
some conflict. He wants the parliament to recognize it as a genocide.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is, I'm guessing he just wants votes, but like these people are dragging Canada's image through the gutter just so that they can win an election. Um, I don't know. It's not really a question. I guess it's open ended. Like, what are your thoughts on
I
that?
mean, next to Trudeau, Justin, Jagmeet Singh is the most detrimental politician or Canadian figure in Canada. Um, and what you're referencing, is an important point because here we speak of an issue devoid of Canadian content, if you want to call it that. I do believe, like I haven't read everything about his what he wants with this recognition, but I think it's fair to say that you know 95% of this thing has nothing to do with Canada or Canadian politics. It's certainly not contemporary Canadian politics. So why is Jagmeet Singh putting all this effort into this particular issue and designation, right? Work for Canadians. And this is true of Justin as well. Your job is to work on behalf of Canadians. And that's all of us of different ethnic and religious varieties and so on and so forth. With this initiative, that's not what Jagmeet Singh is doing, but I think it fits very well. I mean, I don't think Jagmeet Singh's primary concern is Canada. I think it's Khalistan, the formation of a Sikh nationalist state, and I think that's Jagmeet Singh's number one concern. And in this initiative, we see a concrete example of that.
So, Brad, we've touched on some very serious challenges facing the country, and I kind of want to end it on a positive note. So, what do you think that's changing for the better in Canada, and what advice do you have for Canadians that want to see change?
I don't think anything is changing for the better. I mean, this is off the top of my head, and I could rack my brain for a while, and maybe come up with something, but I don't see anything that's what's better. I mean, the economy isn't. Intercommunity relations aren't. Farming isn't. Energy development in Alberta isn't. We can cross the spectrum from the practical and pragmatic to the ideological, and I can't find a darn thing. But I expected this from the moment Justin Trudeau was crowned, woke king of Canada from the absolute first second. I looked at him during his election speech after victory in October of 2015, and I said, what's really in the back of this guy's mind? This country has no idea what's coming and what I have up my sleeve in terms of plans and an agenda for the future of Canada. That's what I think was in the back of his mind, and that turned out to be absolutely true.
Brad, where can the audience go to learn more about you, learn more about your party, or donate or contribute to your cause?
Yeah, I think the Substack, uh, my Substack is the place to go.
I actually have it here.
You have it there.
I have it at substack.com/@sign BRADSALZBERG.
Yeah, that's it.
All right. Well, Mr. Salzberg, I wanted to thank you very much for coming on, for sharing your time with us,
You're
and
welcome.
telling us a little bit more about your party.
You're very welcome, Payman. Thanks a lot for having me on.
Goodbye.
Bye now.